Righto, Money Miners, we've got Australian cricket fame with us here, Michael Bevan.
The man, the myth.
The man, the myth is, and he's apparently a geologist as well. So,
you look a bit different, mate.
Just run with it, mate. Just run with it.
I've had to run with it for basically my whole life, and I finally thought I was getting to an age bracket where all the young people don't know who Michael Bevan is anymore. I thought I'd finally escaped it, but thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, no worries. No, well, mate, you're going to be at the stage soon where that Michael Bevan will be getting asked the Michael Bevan. Everyone will think he's Michael Bevan, the geologist. So that's where we're headed. Mate, we come across your bloody in the weeds geology content, and mate, we'd love to use you for our purpose because it was bloody impressive. Your videos, loved them.
Well, I'm happy to be used. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, like we've gotten a lot out of it. I mean, for the money miners, like, Mike's got a YouTube channel. It's probably some of the best, free, I think, alpha that's out there. You're an independent geologist. You're not paid by the companies, but you're doing these geological deep dives on companies that, interest you. And I mean, you've just sort of wrapped up a really big coverage of all of these different rare earths companies. And that's going to be the focus of our episode today. But I've really, appreciated the way you can simply explain geological concepts. I think, we've had a pre-chat and you said I'm not the world's best geologist, but I do think you've got, a very great capability to explain geological things simply.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. I mean, the idea came about because as geologists, every time a company puts out an announcement, every other geologist looks at it. And to be honest with you, half the time we think to ourselves, what a load of crap, but you're always sort of constrained by what you can and can't say publicly, and especially when you're employed by another company, there's a lot of constraints on you. But as geologists, we all sit around and look at everyone else's work and try to find reasons why it's either good or why it's bad. And the amount of friends and family I've got who have been investing in the exploration space for 20 odd years, and a company will put something out that seems relatively mundane and straightforward, and they'll ask me, they'll say, Michael, what does this mean and what comes next? So for me, I just thought, well, it seems pretty logical for me to be able to go through, independently break down companies' announcements and just tease out some of the spin that sometimes put on the announcements as well, and then explain the processes and what the geological terms really mean for the layman, because it's easy to take things for granted when you're in this space every day. But if you a complete different industry, I think a lot of the terms and I guess the terminology is just, completely alien to people. So yeah, that was the idea behind the channel anyways. And so far it's been well received.
The joys of being independent, mate. You can say whatever the fuck you want now.
Yeah. I mean, it might be a little bit different for you because I still have to bump into all the geologists at the pubs, right? And
so do we. We don't give a fuck anymore. Like MD sucking on the street.
Yeah.
Mike, we're going to go deep on rare earths today, and we're going to start with a bit of a broader, guide to navigating your way through junior rare earth companies, and then get into the weeds on quite a few sort of flyers and other companies. But I'd love to just hear super quickly why you've gone so deep on rare earths. Is that just a particular spot of interest for you?
Well, I've spent the last 3 years working in rare earths for companies. So essentially, the story of rare earths is quite exciting because it was something that just wasn't really on the radar for Australian exploration companies at all. And then as of about 3 years ago, all of a sudden the prices just absolutely took off. And it was the hot commodity. It was identified as a critical mineral by the Australian, the US governments, pretty much every Western government out there. There was money in the market for rare earth exploration. And a lot of companies that didn't know they had them or weren't even looking for them all of a sudden discovered, hey, we've got these and there's an opportunity here. So the industry just absolutely, and on top of that as well, it was identified by the West strategically as being critical for Western countries to develop their own supply chain and also the ability to refine and then manufacture rare earth magnets and things like that as well. So there's a bit of geopolitical strife at play. But so a lot of companies, and I was included, we sort of had to just, we're all gold and copper geologists in base. And this happens, and all of a sudden we'll have to become experts in rare earths very quite quickly. So it's a very frustrating commodity space to work in. And you go through a series of just being wrong. At each step, every time you think you know what's going on, you just are wrong. So I spent about 3 years in the space. And when I launched GeoInvest, we covered off on some uranium and lithium. They're commodities which, are in the dip at the moment. Well, not uranium, but lithium, particularly in the dip. And for me, as I guess a personal investor, I prefer to generally want to buy into something that is, I like to buy a dip as opposed to buying into hot commodities, right? And with a longer term sort of investment. So we started off looking at those, and then rare earths as well. They were super hot, the prices were through the roof, and now they've come right back. So it just sort of seemed natural to go into rare earths, and the more rare earth companies I started to sort of review, the more requests there were for more rare earth companies, and it just snowballed like that. So that's why we deep dived into rare earths.
I think you've covered about, by my count, it was like at least 7 different companies you've done, pretty thoughtful deep dives. And the scope of your analysis, you do limit yourself like exclusively to the geology. You don't talk about all of the other elements of a company, be it the finances, the cap structure, the board. You go to the geology and talk about the resource. And we're really keen to unpack the way you think about that across these companies that we're going to talk about today. But just starting broadly, right? There's so much nuance to the rare earth projects. Like they can be hard rock hosted, they can be in clays, they can be ionic. What should the layman really understand about the different types of rare earth projects out there, and what are good grades for the different types?
So the first thing you need to be aware of and you need to identify is if there's a company that you're interested in with a project, you need to firstly identify, is it hard rock, is it clay hosted, or is it ionic rare earth? So it's rare earth in clay still, but it's ionic, all right? And it's important to identify which one of those 3 it is from the beginning, because they all operate very different and operate at different grades and are viable at different grades and have different processing and so forth. So you really need to be quite aware of what you're looking at. And something that does happen is there can be some blurring of those lines sometimes, and often that blurring can be accidental by the spin that a company might put on an announcement. But you just don't want to make the mistake of finding yourself comparing a clay-hosted deposit with a carbonitite and a hard rock deposit, for example. So, when it comes to grade-wise, if we look at, say, Mount Weld, which is probably, the best known, you're looking at, say, 8% trio, which is, true total rare earth oxide. If you're looking at something that's ionic, now the goalposts have moved for ionic rare earths quite a bit. So if we went back 3 years ago, the conventional thinking, and this is what was sort of interpreted from China, which I think was a bit of a mess, but you're really looking at anything above 300 ppm could be the bottom grade that you're interested in. Now, as time's progressed, it's really become apparent that that's not going to cut it, and rare earth prices have really come back. So you're really looking at a sort of a few thousand ppm. So maybe 0.1% or 0.2% could be potentially economic. But there's some tricks involved in that as well, because rare earths are 15 different elements, right? And then there's sort of 2 which are added on. And the abundances of those different elements within your total basket is the main determination. So you can have, I'm probably going too fast here, but you can have, for example, 3,000 ppm trio, but if 2,000 of that is all in cerium, then it's no good, because cerium isn't worth anything.
Yeah.
So the relative abundance of those different elements is really critical to whether or not your clay rare earth will work.
And how much of a function of it for them, and Meteroric was the one that sort of changed the landscape, and now we've got VMM as well, and Brazilian rare earths is a bit of a mix, but how much of it was the acid required to extract these rare earths? Like you hear about the ones down near, I think, Esperance and that we're going to need, 6 times as much as what a meteoric would have needed. Was that a big factor in what was going to become economic and what wasn't?
Yeah, so that's everything, to be honest with you. And it's one of the main things that differentiates an ionic deposit from a clay-hosted deposit. So I actually heard in one of your other episodes, you asked a question and you said, what is the difference between an ionic rare earth? What makes an ionic rare earth deposit? Is it the minerals or what is it? And the answer is it's actually the absence of minerals, right? So I'll give you an example. In an ionic deposit, you really don't have any rare earth minerals that are left. The rare earth minerals have already been weathered away and nature's already done the processing for you. And then the rare earths are just bound to the surfaces of the clays loose. So when you mix ammonia sulfate with it, for example, fertilizer, right? You do about a pH 4 solution. It'll kick those rare earths off, and then you've got them free in a solution. You don't need to dissolve and break down minerals in order to access your rare earths, right? So that's critical. Now, once you go down in your pH, so you go from pH 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, each step is a factor of 10 as far as the strength of the actual acid, right? So you're going from tomato juice to stomach acid sort of thing as you jump down there. So once you start to go to pH of 3 and pH to 2, you start breaking down actual minerals, right? And not only so, then you can access the rare earths that are in minerals, but you also access everything else that's in those minerals as well, like the aluminium, the iron, the uranium, the thorium, et cetera, et cetera. So what makes ionic rare earths work, and in fact, ionic, is that you can just wash it with a pH 4 solution. You'll extract your rare earths into your solution, and you get very little aluminium, iron, uranium, thorium, things like that with it.
Can you talk a bit about that pH sweet spot, and look, why the pH 4 or pH 3 is kind of essential to get the recoveries?
Well, it is really because once you start to go stronger than pH 4 or even pH 3, you still get it. So a lot of clays will have a sub 1 micron iron oxide lattice work, which binds all your clay particles together. If you go to a pH 3 or stronger, you'll dissolve that iron oxide lattice work. Now, there are rare earths in there, but there's also iron as well, right? So the key to the whole I'm lost for words at the moment, but the key to making the whole thing work is basically not having the dissolution of minerals and gangue elements in your clay. So if you need to go stronger than a pH of 4, then basically it's not ionic.
Yeah, so,
right?
So that starts dissolving the shit you don't want that goes into the mixed rare earth concentrate.
It's really quite simple. If you wash your dirt at a pH of 4 and you for half an hour and you get your rare earths out, then they've been ionically bound. If you need a stronger pH than that, then you're at the point where you're starting to dissolve minerals.
By minerals, you mean the lattice?
Well, the lattice, but there's a lot of different rare earth minerals, right? So when I mean like a monazite is a mineral that you would have heard about a lot.
Yep.
Right. So monazite's the primary mineral, which is mined at Mount Weld and things like that. And it will be neodymium, praseodymium, so NdPr, and then phosphorus, and then oxygen, all combined together to make, and thorium or uranium in there as well, all combined to make an actual mineral. So that mineral itself is extremely resilient to leaching. And that's why when you talk about a hard rock deposit, you'll hear people talk about, acid cracking, high temperatures, high acid, high pressures in order to crack that mineral and extract the rare earths out of it. So there are a range of different minerals which occur within your profile. But when we're working with ionic clays, basically most of those minerals are absent, right? And we don't even need to worry about trying to break those minerals down to access the rare earths, because the rare earths are just bound to the surface of the clay particles.
So to determine if something is an ionic clay or not, you have to do the MET testing on it to determine how much acid is needed, or do you know before that?
No, there is a way that you can get a strong indication of whether or not it's going to be ionic first, and it's all about space rocks. So essentially, let's see if I can explain this in a quick and easy way. So there are 15 rare earths. One of them is cerium, right? And cerium is the main element that you find in, say, monazite as well, right? As an example. Now, when you go through the weathering process, cerium and your rare earths are liberated in the profile. Cerium is really mobile, so it won't stick around. All right. So a lot of your other elements will hang around and bind to your clays and so forth. Cerium will disappear and it will want to go into a secondary form, like a secondary mineral, right? It will want to turn into something else. It won't want to just hang around like everything else does. So if you get a space rock, right, a meteorite, right, this rock hasn't gone through the normal processes, the sorting process that Earth has, right? Because Earth is just a whole bunch of space rocks put together, heated up, and then start to sort out, right, into different layers, right? So if we take a look at a space rock, a chondrite, we can see what a normal distribution of rare earth look like if it hasn't been gone through that separation process. If we take our drill intercepts and we get our rare earth results and we compare those back to the chondrite, to the space rock, what you'll see a negative cerium anomaly. So you'll see that all of your cerium's disappeared and gone somewhere else. And that's when the strongest indication that you know that you're looking at ionic rare earths before you go do your initial MET testing, right? So it's not 100%, but it's pretty close, because I'm yet to find a true ionic rare earth deposit that doesn't have what's called a negative cerium anomaly. And even if you go and you take a look at, say, the Brazilian rare earth, so you look at Meteroric, you look at VMM, you look at Serra Verde, normally a normal sort of distribution in your total rare earth basket, cerium might be, say, 40 to 50% of your trio abundance. And then you have lanthanum, which might be, say, 20, 25%. And then neodymium and praseodymium combined will make up, say, 20% as well. And then the rest are really quite small. When you go and you look at all of the ionic deposits, the cerium is basically nothing. And the most abundant element you have is lanthanum. So that's what I mean by a negative cerium anomaly, because, you know, instead of cerium being 40% of your trio basket, it's actually only maybe 3% or 5%. And that's when you know, okay, we're onto something here.
It's interesting you asked that question, Matty, because I took a list of your red flags, Mike, when it comes to, you know, assessing these rare earth companies, and one of them was if they call it ionic straight away. Matty,
like ionic rare earths.
Well, I don't know. I guess if you just had a discovery and you call it discovery of ionic, but you haven't done.
Well, there's a company that called themselves ionic rare earths.
Yeah. I'll rattle off the other red flags I took note of, and feel free to correct me if I miss any, Mike. But the red flags you listed: announcing strong recoveries but using a very strong acid. If the announcement doesn't reveal the details of what acid they use, that's a red flag. If a company produces an oxide but it doesn't give you any indication of the purity of that oxide, it could be filled with gang materials, if they call it ionic straight away. If they just announce big grades without giving you the trio minus cerium, and also large scale low grade rare earths that, you know, using a cutoff of 300 ppm but might not be trio minus cerium in that cutoff. Right. Yeah.
So they're all things to watch for. Sometimes those things happen without any malicious intent by the company. It is simply just you only know what you know at certain stages of the exploration. So you announce what you know, and some of that data you might not have. So, you know, not all red flags are born equal, let me put it that way. But they are certainly things to one thing that they really indicate is they indicate that the company isn't familiar with the rare earth space. All right. And they've just got rare earth intercepts, and they either want to go, okay, wow, we've got these, we don't know what it really means, So let's just put it out to the market. It's in clays. We don't know anything about Ionic or clay hosted. So to us, it looks like Ionic. So we'll just call it Ionic. That's sort of one red flag, because you go, well, they really aren't providing any information that an informed investor would want to know. Again, too, like I said, cerium and lanthanum really aren't worth anything. So if you're sort of saying, wow, we've got high grade at 1,000 ppm, if that's what you think is 1,000 ppm as an example, but 80% of it's all cerium and lanthanum, then you're really looking at 120 ppm NdPr as an example, and it's just a long way off where you need to be. So one of those things that you always want to look for is you want to look for your trio minus CE, right? That's just a good indication of how much value is there potential, or how much junk is there. And then you also want to look for, obviously, that magnet rare earth percentage as well.
So that's MREO, right?
Yeah, MREO. That's right. That's the important stuff to start looking for. So,
gotcha.
Yeah, because it's no good to anyone as well. And you can tell, like, if I've got a grade intercept 7,000 ppm Eureka, right, in clays, but straight away I can see in the breakdown, the element breakdown, that 4,000 of that is going to be in cerium. Well, it's pretty obvious that I don't have a cerium anomaly, right? Mm. So most of that cerium is most likely going to be in minerals, in monazite or cerianite. And, you need to be a carbonitite or a hard rock deposit to make minerals like that work.
Another big red flag to watch out for, not just in rare earths, lads, is when silverstone aren't powering your mine site. Isn't that right, lads? Yeah, if I ever saw that, I'd be just thinking, shitco, eh? Shitco, yep. Agree with you there, Cobber. I actually went up to a mine site tour the other day, investor day sort of thing, and I saw this diesel generator, and it didn't have a Silverstone logo on it. You get them to fly out straight away or what? Yeah, mate, I'd seen enough. Just slapped a bloody cell on it. Yep. Actions have consequences, don't they? So, look, just make sure Silverstone is powering your bloody mine site if you want to maintain a buy rating. Go Australia! So, with the monazite, so Arafura is a monazite as well, isn't it? No,
I don't know.
Pretty sure it's monazite.
I haven't looked into Arafura much.
Yeah, I think some of it's monazite. There's 3 others. So what with Mount Weld and Mount Weld being the standout as a monazite, how's the
it's carbonitite, Mount Weld?
No, it's a monazite.
So it's a carbonitite, but the primary mineral inside. So carbonitite is the rock type. Right, is the body of rock that's occurred. And then within that is monazite, which is the primary mineral, which is then mined and concentrated for rare earths.
Yeah, so with the processing of it compared to a clay.
Yeah.
Easier or harder?
A lot harder.
A lot harder.
Yeah, a lot harder. So to put things in context, you know how I said that with a ionic clay, you have a negative cerium anomaly. So your cerium is really, really low. In a hard rock deposit that's monazite dominated, your cerium is through the roof, right? You've actually got a positive cerium anomaly, right? Because cerium is probably the most common element in your monazite, right? So if you're looking at 8% in Mount Weld as your total trio, then you're really looking at probably about 60,000 of that ppm, so 6% of that ppm or 5% of that ppm being purely just cerium.
Yeah.
Right. So you're concentrating a lot of stuff. You then need to cook that monazite. Well, after you concentrate it, so you need to blast the rock. You then need to go through. You need to separate the monazite out from the other rock. Then you need to cook it at extremely high temperature and strong acid and under pressure in order to crack the monazite. And then you can sort of go through and start washing it. And then you'll get the rare earth into your solution. but then you also get the uranium and the thorium in the solution as well. So then you need to go through and start working back and removing those impurities. And then what you end up is a NdPr product, but a product that's really quite low in the other two valuable elements, which is dysprosium and terbium. So that's a big process when you compare it to ionic rare earths, which, to put quite simply, is like pouring a bucket of clay into your washing machine, putting some fertilizer in the washing machine in where the detergent goes, right? Putting it on, and then it just washes the rare earths into solution. Use a carbonate after that to increase the pH, and that will then drop the rare earths out into basically into an oxide, right? So there are some impurities that you get in that process, but you're generally looking for about 2%.
Interesting.
Right?
So you avoid that whole cracking and leaching and crushing sort of, high power
you've got
processing.
No radioactive tailing dams. You don't. Yeah, so there are a lot of stages of impurity removal. You still have to go through impurity removal, but there's nowhere near as many stages as well. So you don't really have to do a lot of work to remove the radioactive elements. There's very little aluminium and iron in there. So there's one of the big problems is with aluminium and iron, and you'll see as well if you look at Meteroric's oxide announcement, where they produce an oxide and they talk about the purities and so forth. Aluminium and iron, more aluminium than iron, will actually precipitate out of your solution at about the same pH as what your rare earths do. So while you're trying to remove your impurities, you actually lose rare earths from your solution as well, right? So that's the one big trick with the industry, and that's why that pH 4 is really important as well, because once you go to pH 3 or stronger and you start to get that aluminium and iron into your solution, during the impurity removal of those elements, you also remove your rare earths. Right, so it's a bit of a trick. So if you've got that pH 4 solution, you get your rare earths with very little aluminium and iron, and then in the process of removing the aluminium ion, you lose very little rare earths.
Right, make sure I understand this properly. So we'll just do the summary. So the monazite mineralization at like a Mount Weld, once you crack and leach that the radioactive elements come out of the monazite when you crack and leach it.
Mm-hmm. And the rare earths.
And the rare earths, but you don't get that with the clays. And so the sole purpose of that cracking and leaching facility in Kalgoorlie is to break down the monazite to get the rare earths out once it's in after the concentrate. Yeah, right.
Yep,
I'm a fucking guru.
Mate,
look out.
Geologist Matty Michael. Mike, let's you've done a great segue for us into Meteoric. So, I mean, this one kind of captured the ASX punters' attention early last year, I think. $328 million market cap. So it's got a meaningful valuation these days. They've got the Caldera deposit in Brazil, in that Minas Gerais region. I'm probably saying that wrong. We do a thing on our show, by the way, mate, whenever we talk about a stock which we might happen to own, we say ding, ding, ding. We're a shareholder, and I think you're a ding, ding, ding on this one. So
I'm a ding, ding, ding on Meteoric. That's for sure.
You had this quote when you talked about this one at the start. You said, if you could have the cookie cutter template of the perfect rare earth deposit, it is this. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you have large tonnage of what's high grade, and when I say high grade, I'm talking relative to other ionic rare earth deposits. Keep in mind that when Australia first went into this space, we were looking at 300 plus ppm to 1,000 trio as being high grade, right? That's what we were sort of thinking back then. This is 2 or 3 years ago. And most Australian companies, in their attempts to extract those rare earths, have had to use high pHs and things like that. Meteoric, the average grade of the resource there, so they've just upgraded the resource now, so I think it's about 620 odd million tons at 2,500 ppm. So what you've got is you've got over 70% extractions at a pH of 4. So 70% for your light rare earths and 50% for your heavies. Now, that is basically the dream come true if you're an explorer for ionic rare earth. So you've got grades which are probably about double to 4 times higher than most of the Australian deposits. It's over 70% average recoveries on with a pH of 4. And it's, that's it. That's the cookie cutter examples that you want.
So when you talk about Meteroric,
Mm-hmm.
you basically you say you're looking for a cyanite in a volcanic setting is the perfect sort of setup for this. You pull up this cross section, and you look at their global resource, right? Yeah. They got 619 million tons at 2,538 ppm at the moment. So like when you talk about that like geological setting with the volcanics, like why is that like the perfect kind of setting?
Yeah, so the most important thing to having something ionic is obviously having the right rocks that make the right clays, right? And what we see globally is that you need an alkaline granite in order to get a rare earth deposit, which is seemingly economic, right? This is when we're talking about clay. So the Chinese deposits are like that as well. So the easiest way to explain this is not all granites are born equal. Normally when you hear people talking about rare earths in clays, they're talking about a granite basement. But granite is a pretty big basket term for a whole host of different granites with different chemical compositions, let me put it that way, right? So if you were to imagine a triangle, right, which encompasses all of our different granite types, and at the top of it, you've got silica-rich granites, and one side you've got calcium-rich granites, and then the other side you've got alkaline granites, which are potassium and aluminium-rich granites, right? We really want to be in the granites which are potassium and aluminium rich, and also with a very low silica content. So we want to be as far away from those silica granites as possible, and away from those calcium-rich granites, and in those potassium, aluminium rich granites with a very low silica ratio. So that's what a cyanite is. It's basically a cousin of a granite, but it's got low silica content and is an alkaline type granite.
And then the point you kind of dwell on a lot is the met here, right? In the case of Meteroric, they've got some historic, metallurgy in relation to a bulk sample. When you looked at that, what was your kind of takeaways? It's pretty. I mean, they've looks like they've done this bulk sample on a pretty high grade trio part of the resource, which you always kind of tend to see. But there were certainly pretty lofty recovery of the neodymium, the praseodymium, 52%, 64% respectively. What were your takeaways there?
Well, I mean, to give you an idea, in Australia, a lot of companies struggling to get anywhere near those sorts of recoveries with a pH of 2 or 3 or even 1, right? So when you're just seeing a pH 4 at ambient room temperature as well for 30 minutes and you're getting above a 50% recovery, you're on. You're like, this is great. And that's your initial first pass testing as well. Right. And so from there, you only ever optimize. And if you go and you look at their announcement where they talk about the oxide they produced as well, they used a similar grade, which is actually similar to the grade where they proposed to start mining as well. So they've got a proposed 6-year mine plan at an area in the south, which has got an average grade there of up to 4,500 ppm, and then a bigger resource at 3,000 ppm and so forth. But that's where they're proposing to start. But in that announcement as well, their recoveries since then are even higher. So it's 70+% for the light rare earths and about 50% for the dysprosium and terbium, which are the 2 heavy valuable rare earths.
And what sort of upside do you think about, Mike, in optimizing the recoveries there? So sort of high 50s, 30 minutes room temperature. Can you see that getting to the 70s at a commercial scale?
I think they've already got it to the 70s for the large part, and that's without being at a commercial scale, and they've still got optimization work to do. So they're working with ANSTO. I've worked with ANSTO in the past as well, and when it comes to, I guess, rare earth experts, they're the people that I would be working with to optimize my metallurgy. So I guess they ran a very simple leach, and then this is like a benchtop oxide production, right? So it's extremely small. It's nothing like a pilot plant or anything like that, but just from simple benchtop extractions, they're already at 70-odd%, right? So there are optimizations that you can do as far as your mix of acids. And then there's also, there's a lot of tweaking that comes with the impurity removal. But as they've got it at the moment, really cookie cutter, simple desktop experiment, they've already got a oxide with 98% purity, right? And that's recovering, 70% of the lights from a sample of about 4,500 ppm. So there's not much that I could add at this point as to what would improve that. One thing that companies do, some companies do propose running your leach for a longer period of time, but you really don't want to be doing that, right? You've got a lot of dirt that you need to wash, right? And you just want to get it through as quick as you can, right? So if you're having to, you think about you're washing your, well, there are two things you can do, okay? You can increase the temperature of the solution, which normally just speeds up the reactivity of the solution as well, right? But of course, anytime you need to apply energy to a process and increase temperatures, it's just more cost. And then as well, you can increase your leach time. But increasing your leach time normally only results in improved recoveries if you're dissolving minerals, right? So the longer it sits in the acid, the more your recoveries are, because the more minerals get sort of dissolved in time. So when you're ionic, you really want to have that quick wash time, low pH, and Bob's your uncle. You don't want to play with it too much.
And so where that rare earth oxide that comes out of that, where does that go after that? If you compare it to what amount aligners do with their material, what's the step after that?
Well, there's normally there's a refining process. So it's sort of three stages really. And I know VMM and Ionic Rare Earths are proposing some novel technology to basically separate their oxide. I know American Rare Earths are proposing to do this as well, where what you can do is you can produce an oxide which is all your 15 elements, right, all mixed in together. But then you'd have to sell that to a refinery, and then they would then separate out your rare earths by elements after that, and then it would then get on-sold to an actual manufacturer, right? So depending on what you want to do and what your economics are and your technology as well, you can try to produce a separated product on site. So an NdPr product, and then a SEG product, and then even a lanthanum product if you want, and then a heavy product as well. And then you're going to get a higher price for those individual because you don't have to really have it refined, right? I don't know where the technology is at to make that happen in the West at this point, to be honest with you.
It all happens in China, that step basically, doesn't it?
Yeah, so China's got the chokehold on not only the supply of rare earths, but then the refining of rare earths, and then also the manufacture of rare earths. There are obviously NEO and there are manufacturing companies now in the West, but we are really, really, really far behind China when it comes to all three stages. And that's why when I said at the start of this interview that, not only is there the commodity demand side of rare earths, but there's a real geopolitical driver behind rare earths as well, which I think puts it. I think that's one reason as well why people find rare earths to be really quite exciting, because it's not just meet supply and demand; it's also a geopolitical struggle between China and US to make sure that you can control your own rare earth supply, which is important to all our technologies and certainly the military industrial side of things.
If you look at I think Linus's products that they produce, they do sort of separate oxides to some extent, but there's a further stage of separation that then happens in China, even following that, even though they sell to Japan, it all goes via China eventually. But
yeah, I mean, China's got the market as well. I think, you try to find a buyer for your rare earth oxide, you're inevitably selling it to China at this point. So, and that's something that has been identified as well, is that the reserves of especially ionic rare earths in China are dwindling. And well, this is what I'm told, right, by the US ambassador. But what they've done is they've made a conscious choice where they've said, if we can no longer control the supply of rare earths, as long as we control the buying of the rare earths and the refining and manufacturing of the rare earths, it keeps us in the same position as if we had 100% control of the supply as well. So there's a critical, there's three critical pathways there for the West when it comes to rare earths.
Now, if any overseas listeners want to get in touch with the Australian ambassador, not the Chinese one, mate, Drew Harvey's K-Drill email is in the show notes, isn't it? Funny you say that, because, geez, aren't K-Drill just the definition of a Australian ambassador? So much more than an exploration drilling company. Because, lads, when I mention the word K-Drill, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Tier 1, sample management for RC drilling. 5-star culture for drillers and offsiders. Yep, yeah, excellent point, that one. Now, because it's a bit like Silverstone, isn't it, lads? Like, if K-Drill aren't drilling your exploration holes, it just makes me wonder, what else are you doing wrong? Well, it's as simple as, look, exploration companies need to get their shit together and start handing out some 1 or 2 rig contracts to K-Drill. Yeah, yep, that'd be a big tick from me. Oh, yeah, it'd be a home run, wouldn't it? Oh, 100%, for sure it would be. Yeah, just go K-Drill and go Australia.
Well, Matty's dying to know the comparison between Meteoric and Viridis. Am I saying that right? Viridis, VMM. They're
Viridis Mining and Metals, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, another positive discovery story on the ASX. Much more moderately valued at a $66 million market cap, but there might be sort of nuances in the geology there. So they've got the Colossus project
next door.
Right next door.
And they've lost about a third of their value since they came out with the maiden resource, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, let's get into it. What did you make of the maiden resource, Mike?
Oh, it's excellent. I'll be honest with you, it's excellent.
Now, this one's another ding ding
I'm a
ding.
ding ding on DMM, and to be honest with you, I mean, there's not much difference at all between Meteoric and VMM in their deposits. They have the same geology. There's maybe 200 to 300 ppm in the difference between their resource grades. Viridis has a little bit of a higher embryo percentage, but really, to be honest with you, both of those deposits are much of a muchness, right, when it comes to the type of deposit that they're looking at. Now, Meteoric is far more advanced than VMM in its exploration process. So Meteoric is, 600 odd million tons and has revised their resource up and up and up. This is at 200 million tons. This is VMM's maiden resource. And with their resource interpretation as well, they were really quite conservative. So most companies, when they do their resource estimation, they'll drill from the surface to the top of the granite or the top of the basement. And then all of the clay in between, they'll wrap up and put into their resource, regardless of variation, of recovery variation down the profile. So, and that's fine as well. That's completely fine to do. There's no problems with that. That's probably the done thing. And it's also not uncommon for a company to want to come out with as larger maiden resource as possible, right? Sure. So VMM, however, chose to do the opposite, and I think this is excellent by them, is they knew that they had poorer recoveries at the very top, at the very top layer in the leach zone. And then also the very bottom layer, which is what you might call, they call it their transition zone. So where the clays are transitioning towards a granite. So they excluded those two zones from any resource calculation completely, right? Which is a very conservative approach to your tons. But that sort of signals to me that they're really quite serious about making sure the economics sort of work from the start. They could have easily included those two zones because everyone else did, right? Especially in their inferred resources, and no one would have faulted it for them. But they've kind of said, no, we really want to make sure that we're as accurate as we can be. We're not including tonnage, which we don't think we'll get high recoveries from at this point, and we'll start from there and then expand out. So really quite good.
But Mike, overall, I thought everyone had to tick that, box of reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction.
Yeah, you do that. You do. But when you think about your cover zone, maybe, so you only have, metallurgy is really funny with rare earths, because if you want to have a look at a company that's doing really good metallurgy at the moment, it's Red Metals and the Supplier project, right? So they're running bulk column leach tests at the moment under all sorts of conditions on a granite. It's a complete different scenario, so I don't want to confuse things by going into them. But all I want to say is they're doing a really robust network at the moment. Throughout your whole profiling in deposit, you're always going to get variations in that recovery. Like if I do this drill hole and I do met work all down the profile and I get these recoveries, the next drill hole, there's going to be some variation. And then if I go a few hundred meters away, there's going to be some variation from that again as well. So if I have done met testing on some bulk samples, and I know that in this 2 or 3 meter interval, I've only got, say, a 30 or 40% recovery. But then when I go down the profile to, say, 20 meters, right, maybe I'm getting 80% recovery. And if I mix this all up into an ore body, right, then overall my recoveries might average out to be 60%, 65%, whatever. And I can incorporate that lower grade material, and it just sort of gets, lost in the wash, and it's sort of fine. So I guess that's an easy way, especially when you're at the really early stages of an inferred resource, to say, well, there's some feasible economics here. And even if you look at, because their grade is actually really quite good, at 2,500 ppm, like I was saying, a 30% recovery, right, on the magnet rare earth there is still better than what majority of Australian rare earth explorers were looking at. Right. So, it's just sort of, I guess it's just the, there needs to be some grounds for feasible recovery. And it would be easy to argue and justify that just because I have lower grades, it doesn't mean I should exclude it. But Viridis have done it for the moment.
I actually discovered your content. Someone pointed me in your direction because of your critique of a certain uranium producer in your home state that, on kind of their first resource since getting the project, they basically, what did they do? They halved the cutoff grade, and they
doubled the total resource without doing any drilling. So they doubled the resource just by halving the cutoff grade.
And the measured resource hadn't changed since 2016, essentially. And I remember you drawing a picture.
Friends of the show.
Toro Energy did the same. Just fucking updated mineral resource and studies, and just with new prices and new cutoff grades. Nothing's happened.
Halving the cutoff grade's okay if the uranium price has gone up, but I think in the case of this certain uranium producer, it meant that they were. Well, you can explain in better geological words than me, Mike. But it meant that they were. The grade variation was, it said they were taking it from a part where you actually couldn't extract uranium in ISR. It was like a certain zone.
Potentially, that's right. Yep. So, So, I mean, jumping over to uranium now and in situ recovery from rare earths, like it's very different. But because uranium, when it occurs in your paleo channels and sandstone hosted, you really want to have a good interval of sandstone or with high porosity, right, where you get good flows. And you really want the uranium to be mostly within that sandstone layer. Now, sometimes what you do get is you'll get uranium, but it's either in clays or it's in a very narrow band of sandstone, which is in contact with the clays. And if it is at that contact as well, what you'll often find is the uranium is actually stuck to the clays, right? Or bound in the clays at the surface at those contact between those two layers. Now, clay is not porous, right? You can't push uranium, you can't push a solution through it and extract it. And also when you're putting down your well, right, and you're pumping your solution down, which is then going to travel through a lithological layer and get pumped up, you know, the amount of actual interaction with that uranium that's stuck to the roof of that sandstone is quite limited. So when that company went from, that was Boss that did that, right? So when they first took over the project, when they cut the resource grade from 500 ppm to 250 ppm, it increased the resource as well, but a lot of that resource was within really quite confined lithologies. Now, the thing is as well, though, is that in the process of doing that review, there are very little cross-sections available of their resource, right? So I can only make that inference from the information that's available. Some of their other resources, I just hear from word of mouth from people that have worked on the deposit, are actually really quite good, excellent, right? And those sorts of problems that I pointed out in the review aren't current, but you can only really base your opinion off what you can see.
They changed that cutoff grade at a point in time when the uranium price was down in the doldrums. It would have been in the low sort of $30 range, a similar price to at the point in time where they turned off production because they couldn't mine feasibly. So they didn't have a economic footing to kind of stand on, saying, hey, we can actually mine it at a lower grade and still be economic.
I think that that's probably a pretty fair assessment.
and they got rid of the top cut. So if I forget accurately, yeah.
It's one of those things where I guess, you know, companies can change. I got to be careful what I say here, I'll be honest with you. But a company's intentions can change very much between the company that first acquires that project and the company that it is now. And it wouldn't be uncommon for a company to acquire a project, say, let's just grow the size of this resource a lot. We're projecting a recovery in the uranium price. Let's make this as big a attractive deal as we can so that we can on-sell it. And then all of a sudden the economics become right to where you say, oh, hang on, what we've got here could actually really work. And you start to address the whole situation with a different set of eyes. So that's probably my interpretation of what happened there, is that it was originally acquired with the intention of, you know, growing the resource as much as you can and selling the company. And then they acquired it, they grew the resource, things started to change, they had a lot of positive traction, and then they said, let's go.
To flip back over to rare earths, I'd love to talk about Brazilian rare earths, and I know this one's a ding, ding, ding for you. It's been a fascinating journey. So they IPO'd in December of last year. They had pretty notable backers, Gina, Whitehaven as well. From a mineralization perspective, which I'm keen to dive into with you, I understand they've got 3 different styles, but just to start with, have you been a bit, you know, taken aback by how successful and how well the company sort of narrative has been received?
No, I'm a little bit I'm not confused, but I want to know more about what's happening there geologically. I think with Brazilian rare earths, you're looking at a hard rock deposit and a multi-commodity deposit as well. I think that's the true ultimate final destination for Brazilian rare earths for me, reading between the lines. And that's why I think as well that you've got, with ionic rare earths, this is still an experiment that's yet to really come to fruition in the West, right? So, you know, you've got Serra Verde, which is going into production, But when it comes to ionic rare earths in the West, we don't have any success stories so far where they've said, oh, wow, this company's done, they've built their processing plant and it's working and they're making bank yet. We don't have any of those stories. We hear about it in China, but the way of producing it in China is very rudimental compared to, I guess, what we do here in the West. And so for a lot of investors in rare earths, traditional investors in rare earths, you're probably not going to really want to get on board as much with something that's ionic that's not proven yet until some company dares to do it first and makes it super successful. Brazilian rare earths have got, like you said, 3 different mineralization styles there. They've got an ionic deposit, which is about 1,500 ppm, I think. It's actually similar to what Sierra Verde is, but it's not really that high grade. Like the ionic component, 511 million tons, I think, off the top of my head. And Meteoric have a better ionic deposit than what they do. But then they have, 1 to 2% monazite in the clays sitting above their hard rock, which has got these zones of ridiculously high trio, niobium, and uranium, right? And so what that sort of says is you've got, you wouldn't at those grades, monazite's quite easy to concentrate, right? So you can dig up that clay and you can separate it out by density and end up with a monazite con, which you can then sell, right? So you're going to free dig down to your hard rock because the monazite's probably going to pay for it. And then you've got this hard rock thing, which we're still trying to work out, right? How much of it is, how thick it is it economic, and what's really going on there. But when you start looking at the grades as well, like uranium grades of 2,000 ppm, like it wins on uranium alone. And then you've got the niobium, and then you've got the rare earths as well. And you're thinking, Jesus, this is something exciting. Like, what's going to happen here?
Sounds like it's like a bloke and a Sheila getting together, and they've got 2 or 3 kids each, and they're just trying to create a happy family. But there's just one favours the other, and one, it's a Brady bunch of a deposit.
I think it's more they've got 3 kids each, and
some stepsons they've brought with them or something as well.
Yeah, but they're probably going to send about 4 of those kids away to boarding school, I think, right? And just focus on the 2 which are the highest achievers. So that's where I sort of see Brazilian rare earths at the moment. To be honest with you, I'm really quite excited by what they've found and what they've yet to find as well. And I think they're going to be. I think they've got a long exploration pathway ahead of them, just trying to unlock what they have at the moment. So no, it's exciting.
Geez, digging up that monazite and concentrating it and fucking it off sounds I'll be like, oh, that's heaps easier.
Yeah, 100%. Yep, 100%. So I really don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know what the final outcome there is going to be for them. But just looking at the base grades, you think, it's hard to see how something really exciting is not going to happen there.
Yeah, I always have historically struggled to comprehend and understand valuation of companies that have early stage kind of real exploration upside attached to them. And in this case, it's a $715 million market cap at the moment, which you won't find on Google or Market Index because they never include the unquoted shares. It's an IPO, there'll be escrowed ones, and it's only the quoted shares that appear in those market caps. But that's a big valuation, a big company valuation, and early stage. But like you say, like something that's pretty, geologically, it's a bit of a unicorn. You talk about these like placer deposits and like the monazite concentration hosted in clay instead of sand. What does that actually mean to a layman like me?
Not a lot, to be honest with you. Yeah, to like if you look at a placer deposit, remember when I said before that monazite is extremely resilient to weathering, all right? And that's why you need to acid crack it, right? You need to acid leach it, you need to crack it under pressure and so forth to get the rare earths out. So with a placer deposit or a mineral sands, we're talking about mineral sands essentially, They're a little bit different, but much for our purposes, they're the same. You can have a billion years of weathering of a granite getting weathered, washed down, and then transported. And some of the only minerals which will survive that process will be the quartz, the zircon, and then the monazite, right? That's how resistant to weathering the monazite is. So those minerals get accumulated at, beaches, paleo beaches, things like that. And then you can just dig up the sand, and using density separation, you can separate out those minerals. And that's the classic way that monazite was always mined, particularly in India and back in the day. Now, the process here for the clays sitting on top of BRE's deposits is basically the same, right? Everything else has weathered away and broken down into clays and clay minerals, except this abundance of monazite, right? So there's some geological nuance here, which I don't actually know the answer to yet, because if you look at a lot of carbonitites, they will often have a monazite cap, right, where it's been enriched in monazite. And then as well, so that's sort of what I think straight away. I think, hang on, this abundance of monazite at the top here is something similar to what I would see at a classic carbonatite deposit, but they don't have a carbonatite, right? But they do have that low silica alkaline volcanic complex. And then within that, you have this very defined layer as well, the cumulate, which is enriching the other elements as well. So for me, I'm sitting here thinking, geez, I wish someone from BRE would give me a call and explain to me what's going on. But that's really high grade monazite to have in clays.
And the cherry on top is the Rio drilling that you kind of get to re-assay without actually have to fronting the cost for the drilling yourself, right?
Yeah, I think they said, I'm probably getting this wrong, but top of my mind, I think it was $18 million worth of drilling or something like that they get the results to reinterpret. So yeah, Rio was looking for bauxite, I believe.
35 kilometres worth, pretty hefty quantity of drilling there. I mean, you look at the magnetics and stuff, and you kind of think this is a potential company that has a decent, chance of discovering more than is currently known as a result of what you've seen to date, or are you kind of just?
No, I think. I mean, I hate to be. Yeah. I think they're going to find 10 times what they found today. Yeah. So far, because the thing is at the moment is most of their discovery being the monazite concentrate the clays, they actually don't have a lot of basement drilling targeting these, the cumulate rock, right, which has got the niobium, the rare earths, and then also the uranium in it as well. And where they have found it, it's very, very thin, right? It's normally only a few meters thick, and they might only have one hole going through and intercepting at this point. Now, they have that at 4 or 5 different locations across their sort of tenement package. So as far as they are so early in their stages of exploration of what I think is the hard rock potential here, that they've got a lot of work and a lot of drilling to do. And how thick or how many of these cumulate bands they find, we don't know, but it seems apparent that they pretty much run north-south through the entire tenement package at the moment, right? So they're going to be found in almost every tenement that they hold along the VRPS. And so it's exciting. You're like, holy shit, we've just scratched the surface. I think they've just scratched the surface of what they potentially have. And that's why I say that when people look at these early exploration results for a hard rock deposit, they go, holy moly, let's go.
So with those ionic clay ones, if you combine VMM and Meteroric, that's like 800 million tonne of material that you say is much easier to process than a carbonatite. What could those projects essentially provide globally? Will they be able to compete with your Mount Weld and your Mountain Pass if they build them at scale?
Well, I think for starters, so VMM at 200 million tons for a maiden, I expect they're going to hit 300 million tons, probably 400 million tons themselves as well, to be honest with you. So that's sort of where I see that going, and I don't have any information pertaining to that base, but just what I can see as far as the drill density. And again, too, VMM, their drilling is very, very junior as well. They haven't even drilled to the basement on all of those project areas. A lot of what they're doing is still just off auger drilling, right? So it's very limited by the depth the auger can actually get to. So I guess the thing is, it comes down to, so there are two elements, dysprosium and terbium, which are heavy rare earths, and they're more abundant in ionic deposits than they are in hard rock deposits as a relative percentage, right? So globally, your ionic deposits are actually one of your larger sources of these two elements. So that's an advantage for the ionics. Now, when it comes to, I guess, your production costs as well, Meteroric are about to release I believe their scoping study is like imminent. And I'm going to be super interested to see what costs they allocate to both their mining and then their processing as well. But I expect in total, they're going to be suggesting about $15 a ton, right? Which is cheap. So I guess that's where they become competitive, right? Because they'll be able to sell an NdPr product and a dysprosium and terbium product for good price.
What about the output? How much the total rare earth output compared to a Mount Weld?
I don't actually really know much about how they would look as a comparison and stacking up in the competitive world of buying an oxide. I haven't actually. It's not really my wheelhouse, to be honest with you.
Interesting.
But the footprint's enormous, right? Like that's a lot of tons you're talking about.
Build the cunt as big as you want. By the sounds, you're not going to have a shortage of dirt.
Yeah, but there must be environmental considerations in relation to that, and I don't know if
the model is that you get your backhoe, you dig your dirt up, you put it in the truck, you take it to your giant agitated vat, right? Because this is one thing about the rare earths is that you can't heap leach them, right? So in situ leach, well, maybe we should just quickly go through that quickly. In situ leach in some places in the world is still a viable option,
China.
Right? And that's generally how it's done in China as well, right? You just drill into the top of the hill, you pour your ammonia sulfate into the hill, add water, drill into the side of the hill down the bottom and collect the water as it comes out in ponds, and Bob's your uncle. That's
in situ leach makes it sound so much more sophisticated than it is in China. It's just pour a fuck ton of acid into a mountain and get it out at the bottom.
No, mate, it's fertilizer. It's growing crops.
Well, no, you are right. Is that I'm just adding fertilizer to the hill, right? Right. So I'm gonna, so in situ leach is an option somewhere. And if you look at Cobra Resources, who they're actually listed on the London Stock Exchange, but they've got a project here in South Australia where they've been able to extract rare earths from a paleo channel at about a pH of 3, right? And the paleo channel is significant in size as well. So they're going down the pathway of in situ leaching, similar to what you would with a uranium model, but for rare earths. So I do suggest that if you're interested in this space and you want to see how things evolve and how it plays out, you do pay attention to Cobra and watch what they're doing as well, because they're probably the only person I'm aware of that's pursuing an in situ leach paleo channel style rare earth deposit at the moment. So that's excellent, but that's one model. Another model is, I guess, that people have explored is a heap leach, right? Which is classic. We see it with copper, we see it with gold and so forth. Dig your rocks up, put them in a big pile, put acid over the top of it, collect the acid solution off the bottom afterwards. And, that has advantages because you can just dig it all up and stockpile it, make your pads, and it's quite low expense, a low cost way of mining. The problem with clays is that clays aren't porous. You don't get percolation of your acid solution through your clay. So heap leaching is not really an option. And so you have to go to an agitated vat. So that's why when I said before, your washing machine, like that's the best comparison, right? Because a giant vat with an agitator in it to keep it all moving around. So, you just dig it up, you truck it there, you put it in, you get your precipitates out, you run it through your impurity removal, but all of that dirt, you just put back in the dump truck, take back, and you infill it pretty much straight away. So the model is one of basically rehabilitation as you go. And because you don't have things like uranium and thorium and whatever else, and you're really just washing the dirt with fertilizer, there aren't many, well, I don't want to say there aren't many because you're digging up a lot of dirt that has an environmental impact. But as far as your infill and your backfill, in theory, there's no problem.
Would you say that the Ionic, this whole new Ionic clay landscape has been a negative for existing and possible new carbonitites?
I don't think so.
Why is that? It sounds like they're a lot easier if you can find them.
Yeah. No one's found one that works yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Very true.
Yeah. So.
Oh, but it should, eh?
Yeah. It's like I'm optimistic, to be honest with you. And that's why when I say Meteoric are sort of cookie cutter, well, Meteoric and VMM Viridis are really quite cookie cutter, because if you were to go by any classic model, right, and anything in the realms of what we think could be economic, they're it, right? If they don't work, then nothing will work. But they have to take those first steps, and they have to be the pilot plant for everyone else after that. So I guess 3 years in this exploration space of hunting for rare earths sort of globally, and we're only just at the stage where it looks like we're getting a scoping study from one company with that, looks like it might work if I go through the tick boxes. So I guess if you're a hard rock miner and you're looking at classic sort of carbonitites or monazite mining or whatever it is, then you probably really don't have to worry about anything at this point. And you could start talking about, predictions of rare earth consumption and magnets and this sort of stuff, but I really don't have much faith in them, to be honest with you, because the predictions are only positive and only on the up and up and up. And if you look at the scoping studies that were done by rare earth companies a year and a half ago, the prices were only going to go up, right? But now that's just not the case. So, I just look for, and this is one thing why on my channel, on GeoInvest, I don't talk about the financials, is that I only assess the projects on the merit of the project alone. Because I've been through a few mining boom and bust cycles in this industry now. And despite the commodity price, if a company has a genuinely good project, it survives, right? And lasts through. And so that's what I personally look for as well. I generally don't look at the market economics right now. I look for the quality of the project, because if it's a good project, it'll work eventually.
When you say none of them have worked yet, this shows my ignorance, but Sierra Verde in Brazil, that operation, that's not Ionic?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. No, that's the first though.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's the first. So that's 1,500 ppm at about 900 million tons, and it only just has gone into production, I believe, at the beginning of this year.
Yeah,
and their forecast as well, if you go back to look at their feasibilities and studies and so forth, the pricing was meant to be in a different place then to what it is now. So I really don't have any indication of how well they're doing, if that makes sense.
So definitely not in steady state by any means.
Well,
I don't know yet.
No, I think you need to give them some time, because one thing that I think is likely to happen, and one thing that we see often, heap leaches as a method of production are known for not working. All right. There's lots of instances where they do work. But say you have a heap leach and the proposed mine life is 10 years, and your recoveries are meant to be 60 or 70% by heap leach. With most heap leaches, the recoveries might be, say, 50%, and then the mine life ends up being 5 years, right? So it's just a production method which is plagued with constant problems. And I think, this is just my sense, is that ionic rare earths are going to be very similar, to be honest with you. Think about it this way. If you just got your buckets of clay and put them in a washing machine, what could possibly go wrong? Right? That's a pretty messy sort of situation, and there's a lot of variation there within the deposit as well, as far as recoveries and also grades as well. So I think they just need to be careful to make sure that when they're doing their feasibility work, they're really being as conservative as they can on both their recoveries and also their pricing. Otherwise, I think, because I just don't think that the actual plant at the end of the day is going to be as optimal as what your pilot plant and your test work is.
Maybe we good point to transfer to the hard rock ones, because you've taken a look at a couple of them, and completely kind of it's completely different, I guess, geological context to talk about these. But the one to dig into, which had a good run last year and is off 75% since its peak, was Lindian Resources, the Kangan Kunde deposit in Malawi of all places. Rumour has it that once upon a time in the OG line of stays, they were interested in this and got caught up in arbitration. And anyway, it's all back, but it's a carbonitite too. So
I reckon I know why it had a good run too. I'll tell you that off camera.
So when you look, they've got 25 million tonnes at 3.25% trio. With an indicated resources category at 2.5% cutoff grade. What do you make of this geologically, Mike?
Geologically, there's no problems with it at all.
Yep.
It is almost a cookie cutter carbonitite with monazite mineralization, to be honest with you. I sort of look at it and I think, well, this is it. This is textbook, right? So I think the problem in there is more corporate, and then also where it's located, and then also infrastructure. It seems to be that when I reviewed them, they were progressing very slowly from resource to anything subsequent. And I don't actually know the details around that. I had some angry comments on my YouTube channel directed at the management, but I don't actually know any. I don't know any of that, right? And I actually tried intentionally to stay out of that side of things as well. But to be honest, I can't fault it. Like, if I was going to look at a carbonitite, the grades are good. It seems really simple to mine and then also to concentrate and produce a monazite con. The only thing I can think of is when I look around the area, I think, well, there's nothing there. There's no roads, there's no infrastructure, there's no, I don't even know how you're going to start to build a plant there, to be honest with you. Right? So
Arafura and Nolan's, it's very similar.
Oh, no, I think
even more remote, is it?
10 times harder.
Yeah.
Yep, 100%. Yep.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah.
And another one that had quite a run in recent times was American Rare Earths. They had about a 4x jump earlier this year. They then in March came out with a scoping study, and so they had a MREO sort of ratio, a percentage of 27%. But the sort of gist of this was low grade, kind of big scale. And it said a comment, which you sort of said earlier for these hard rock projects, you said in this video, was that with grades of sort of 5,000 parts per million trio, you really wouldn't bother pursuing it. But scale made you perhaps somewhat interested, as well as in this case, they speak to sort of metallurgical advancements and it being quite simple. Have you got sort of broad strokes views on how you think about American rare earths now?
Yeah, so if you're looking at keeping an eye on alternative models of rare earths. These are the three companies I point you to look at. Is keep an eye on Cobra with in situ paleochannel recoveries. Keep an eye on Sabella, Metals Sabella project with a heap leach of granite. And then keep an eye on American Rare Earths with classic processing of really low grade rare hard rock, but it's bulk tonnage. So they've got, I think the average grade there is about 3,500 ppm, which through density separation, they're able to upgrade 10 times. So they end up with about 3.5% is their total grade. Now, to put things in perspective, when you just talked about Kangankundi and Lindian, for your pre-concentrated grade of your classic carbonatite, you're looking at 3,500 ppm 3.5%, right? And then you go through and you concentrate it 10 times from there. But whereas with American rare earths, they're still hard rock, but they're taking 3,500 ppm, which is more comparable to your clay-hosted deposits, and then they're concentrating it to 3.5%, which is similar to the base grades of a carbonatite, right? So classic thinking for hard rock mining, after you go through your beneficiation process, you end up with the same grade as a carbonatite before you've beneficiated that. Like, how the hell is that going to work, right? So that's the sort of the classic blinkers that you would have on when you first look at that. The thing with American rare earth is that they have a granite, so they have a low silica alkaline granite there as well. And the primary mineral is a mineral called allanite. And allanite has traditionally been mined as an accessory rare earth mineral, but never a primary rare earth mineral. And that's largely because the rocks where allanite is the primary mineral there, rare earth mineral, just haven't been mined before, right? So allanite will occur in other deposits where you have monazite and other things as well, and you would just process it as well. But in this instance, all you've got is allanite. And it does actually, it's the density of the rocks around it are about 2.6 grams per cubic centimeter, but the allanite is about 3.6. So you can actually separate it out and concentrate it really quite easily. And then surprisingly, for American rare earths, well, actually not surprisingly, but American rare earths, allanite doesn't need to be cracked in the same way that monazite does. It's nowhere near as resistant, all right? So you can just acid leach it. You do need a strong acid, right? But you can just acid leach it, and then you end up with your rare earths, and then you also end up with your impurities. But because we're dealing with, I guess, a 3.5% grade, you've got some wiggle room there to incorporate some impurity removal into your processing. So that's the angle there. And they've got, I think they've got 1.5 billion tons of ore, and potential for 120, 130 years of mine life there. So waste to ore ratio is like 0.3 to 1 or something. It's like the strip ratio is just ridiculously low because you can just basically mine the whole mountain, right? Whatever you dig up is ore, right? And that's what sort of all of a sudden makes it potentially viable. Now, they put out their scoping study and they've still got some work to do on their metallurgy, right? That's the main thing that I'll say about their scoping study, is there may have been a little bit preemptive, and they put the scoping study out before they had some questions that you would traditionally like to see answered. But I do know they're working through that now, so it's really worth following. But on the metrics that they put out, it potentially works. But it also American rare earths, and strategically as well, to be honest with you, if the US wants to secure an NdPr feed for the next 100 years and just guarantee it, it seems like a pretty good sort of project to help get across the line.
That's fascinating.
So, yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, super interesting. Fascinating to get that insight. On the financial side of things, they did sort of use a assumed $91 NdPr price, even though at the time it was $54, which they said they'd return a 12% IRR at that price. And now what did we last see? 44.
44, yeah.
So, yeah. But again, to your point of, kind of coming full circle on things perhaps being strategic in certain parts of the country, certain parts of the world rather, they could get a bit of a leg up.
What are the Met work streams there that you want to see done? Was it anything comparable to the Met stuff we've covered previously?
No, they just have a lot more stages.
Okay, because it's conventional,
because they're conventional hard rock.
Yeah.
So for Meteroric and so forth, they dig the dirt up. They don't need to go through any sort of beneficiation process to upgrade the core.
Yeah.
Right. No density separation. No crushing. Crushing and milling is a big expense.
Totally.
They also need to. American Rare Earths also need to blast their rock. So you've got blasting, transport, crushing, and milling. Then you've got density separation. Then once you've gone through your density separation, you need to put it through WIMS, which is basically a magnetic method of separating your ore, so purifying your ore further. And then they can start to leach it. Now, alunite in the mineral composition has iron and aluminium. So in the same way that when I said monazite will be, has phosphorus and has uranium and thorium sort of built into the matrix of the mineral, alunite has iron and aluminium in it as well. And so, you do have those impurities from the leach work just automatically in your solution. So you need to have, it's not that higher impurity removal. There's some minutiae there about how they crush the rock and how they liberate the minerals. And they're really fortunate that that's actually very easy for them, believe it or not. So yeah, it's a different mineral, but they just have quite a lot more steps there compared to Ionic, who just, or Meteoric, sorry, where they just don't have to go through any of that. Gotcha.
And then to round it out with the project that you mentioned was another interesting kind of unconventional way. It's funny, you talk about unconventional approaches to rare earths, which are already unconventional. And I thought Ionic processing was unconventional, but now you're talking about 3 other unconventional pathways. But we'll round that out with red metal because what they've got, like you said, it's like granite hosted. I didn't watch your follow up of red metal, but I watched your first deep dive on them, and you were pretty, I guess, critical of their phase 1 met leach tests, where you kind of pointed out that you showed that chart and it looked like rosy, great recovery on the rare earths and low on the aluminium and iron, but then when you actually chucked in how much of the resource was aluminium and iron, it looked like you were actually getting an iron and aluminium oxide with impurities of rare earth instead of the other way around. How has your thinking changed since you did your first deep dive on them? They've got this project near Mount Isa in Queensland.
It's an excellent story because it does demonstrate how, like I said, not all red flags are born equal, and then also that not every exploration company is being that has some Machiavellian intent when they publish their information as well. So with their first pass drill program, they intersected a granite with, say about 2,500 ppm trio, right? They went through and they put it through at a pH 1 leach, which is a strong acid. And as we've spoken about before, you get all of your deleterious elements, your gang elements there as well. And at pH 1, there's nothing like Ionic or anything like that. There's no deposits at all in Australia that with pHs of 2 or 1 look like they're going to be even close to economic. And it's just not in the realm of sort of really feasibility. When they put out that announcement as well, some of their charts said, for example, we've got 80% recovery of rare earths and relatively low gang elements in the solution as well, being only 5% and 7% of our aluminium and iron. So if you think, well, we've got, and to a lay person, when you look at that, you say, well, I've got 80% rare earth and only 5% iron. But the reality is that your iron content in the actual rock is orders of magnitude higher than your rare earths. So 5% recovery of, let's say 7% iron compared to 80% recovery of 2,500 ppm, it's like night and day. So I was quite critical of them when that announcement first came out. But they kept at it, and they're running a lot of comprehensive met tests, and their subsequent announcement says, hang on, we've got sort of 60% recoveries at a pH of 3 on a hard rock. All right. And now all of a sudden you go, oh, now we're talking, right? So now we're in the realm of this looking really quite feasible here. So that's where they're really targeting a heap leach model, right? Which I said classically doesn't work for clays because you need the percolation. You need a coarse rock size in order for your clays to be able to percolate through and access the minerals. Now for them, they've got a very coarse crush size, so 10 and 15 millimeters, which is quite coarse. And they've got really good recoveries off it at a pH of 3. So I don't know what's going to happen there. But the size of the resource potential is absolutely huge. Like this is another instance where we're looking at something like American rare earths, potentially 2 billion tons of ore, because it's the whole granite seems to be relatively homogeneously mineralized, and quite good recoveries at a high pH. So here, again, until you throw the book in the air and you say, what the hell? Like, what's going to happen here? So they've got a drill program that's currently underway where I expect from this drill program, they'll be able to release an initial resource as well. And I think they have the network done already in these early stages to say, okay, it's potentially could work. But they've got when you read through their announcement, they've got a really comprehensive suite of met testing going at the moment as well. So that's one that I'm following really quite intently because it's hard rock, carbonitites, or it's Ionic. They're the only two models really at the moment that have any evidence that they'll work. The hard rock stuff works, but you need really high grade. The Ionics work in China, but aren't proven in the West yet. And we're currently looking at some companies that tick all the boxes, and it looks like it probably will work, I think. And now all of a sudden, you have these alternative models which people are pursuing, and you're starting to get some encouraging results which are worth following. So definitely pay attention to them. And I have to say as well, for a company that's, one thing I do is I go through the ASX announcements and I point out some of those things, those spin, which can be a little bit deceptive to the layperson. Red Metals and Supplier are putting a lot of technical information into their ASX announcements. And the follow-up video, the first one I was really quite critical of them. The second announcement, I was like, this is looking good because I'm always open to changing my mind with new information.
Bloody brilliant, mate.
Fantastic.
We didn't have time to go through any ones where you're like, this is a giant red flag, but any you want to throw under the bus before we round off?
What's the fucking shittest rare earth companies out there?
Well, there's a review on my channel by Godolphin and their Napa Burra rare earth.
I left that off because it was a $4 million market cap. I was like, there can't be much to this story.
No, I actually did.
Hey, leave some hooks. don't direct everyone to your channel. Leave some hooks.
Well, they're already going to watch the boss episode.
Yeah, let's just cut that boss bit. No, but and I felt bad. I did that review, and like I said, I really I intentionally tried to avoid the economics of the company, the directors and the board. I don't want to talk about personalities and things like that. I really just want to focus on the merits of the projects. And so unfortunately with Godolphin, I did a review and it was requested by subscribers. So all of my reviews come from subscribers or patrons. They say, hey, this is the company I'm invested in. Have a look at it and tell me what you think. That's sort of where the driver of which company I choose comes from. And someone asked me to look at it, and I looked at it, and I released the review literally a day or two before, while they're in the middle of a placement. And, it sort of couldn't have been worse timing. But, so my apologies if I stuffed anything up for anyone, but I may have also saved someone some money. Who knows?
Independent.
Love it.
Who cares?
Love it.
Fighting
Awesome.
for the people. No, that was bloody awesome, Bevo. Love your work, mate. And we will fucking definitely have you. What's after rare earths?
I've started copper at the moment. So
you beauty.
Yeah, review of Carnaby, and we'll just keep going down this copper road. We're going to have an episode probably coming next week where we talk about all those red flags in copper, grades that you need to look for, significant intercepts, trouble mineralization. We're going to touch on all of those different things, so hopefully people can get informed about that. So it'll be copper for probably about 10 different reviews, and then we'll let the market decide where we go next. The subscribers always sort of basically choose which commodity we focus on next. I'll be keeping up the rare earth coverage as well. So some of the companies that I guess I've initiated coverage on, companies like Red Metals at Sabella, Meteoric and Brazilian Rare Earth and so forth. When they do announce something significant, I'll go back over and cover that as well. I don't cover every little announcement they do, but any significant milestones, we'll keep covering that stuff as well.
I will definitely get you on for a copper one, mate. Fuck it, we'll just cover all the commodities after you do them. You do all the fucking work for us, and we'll just come on here and summarise it.
Keep up the good work, mate. I think you're doing a great service to the industry of punters trying to make sense of stuff that's pretty nuanced and pretty technical in a pretty simple way. So good on you.
No, I appreciate it, and thanks for having me on.
Cheers, mate.
Bloody pleasure.
The information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation and needs.